So you know what's really confusing about this movie is the fact that it's called Furious 7 in the trailers and the posters and everything like that. But in the movie, like in the actual movie itself, it's actually called Fast and Furious 7. But when you jump back to Fast and Furious 6, the intro to that movie is actually called Furious 6. I don't know if anyone noticed this, but it's a really confusing part to these two Fast and Furious movies at least. Anyway, that's not a problem for me at all, it's just something I noticed. So, like the last movie showed us, speaking of Fast and Furious 6, this movie is taking place after Tokyo Drift. This was a big twist in the Fast and Furious franchise for people who were watching these movies as they were coming out. I remember sitting in the theater watching Fast and Furious 6 for the first time and seeing that scene, and I was like, oh my god, cannot wait for the next Fast and Furious movie. I don't think that a Fast and Furious movie has had this much anticipation, or as much anticipation as this one got, simply because of that fact. I mean, each Fast and Furious movie, you know, since then has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger to the point of insanity, but this one had more of an emotional hook to it, and the opening scene to this movie is every bit as ridiculous and over the top as you could ever expect from a Fast and Furious movie, to the point that it's kind of almost comical, but it really works. It doesn't ruin this movie at all, the fact that Jason Statham doesn't have a scratch on him, and he apparently caused all of that chaos, leaving an entire hospital in ruins with armed soldiers everywhere, basically. Regardless of that, it actually kind of works as a exposition scene. It's showing us how much of a badass he is in this ridiculous and over-the-top way. As any good filmmaker would know, or any film buff would know, an exposition scene works best when it's accompanied by some form of humor or something to engage the audience instead of just telling you the information. And in this case, the humor is the fact that Jason Statham is walking through that hospital without a scratch on him, and he apparently caused all that chaos. The hook is the exposition. And if you're wondering what that is, it's the fact that we are learning that, oh my god, the villain from the last movie had a brother. He's coming for vengeance. Which brings me to the point of that this is essentially like John Wick, but as the bad guy. Given the fact that the character's brother's life is essentially hanging by a thread, we've rooted for characters who have lost less than that. And once I viewed it in that lens, I started to actually love the hand-to-hand fights in this movie, which were really well filmed and performed. Going off that, I'm just going to say this. When they blew up the house, like the old house from the first movie, I was distraught. Just because, like I've said in my previous reviews, I grew up with the first one. I remember, that, I kind of grew up with that house. So yes, the movie does have a great setup for a revenge story, and this sort of pitting, titans fighting each other, that being Dom and Jason Statham's character. But where the movie starts to lose me is when it introduces Kurt Russell's character, Mr. Nobody, and this whole spy espionage subplot. It actually becomes like the main plot of the movie. And the movie really loses steam here for me because it's just not as emotionally investing. Like Jason, I'm just going to call him Shaw. Shaw and Dom were literally about to kill each other in their first street fight. And then all of a sudden, Kurt Russell is there with his army of goons. And it's like, wait a second. The story's now taken a huge turn. It's not all bad though, because this part of the movie is entertaining. It gives us, or the characters, a lot to talk about, plan and plot about, and bicker about, which is the best part of these Fast and Furious movies, if I'm being honest with myself. When they're trying to plan their next mission and Roman just takes charge and actually comes up with a pretty good plan that leads to a very memorable scene. You all know the scene where the cars are literally falling out of the sky. I mean, this movie does take it to a whole other level, and it keeps getting more ridiculous from here. I mean, Dom drives a car through 3 buildings. So yeah, this movie got quite ridiculous, and I think, to give credit to James Wan here, he kind of knows how to direct ridiculous action. I mean, he kind of did it with Aquaman, and he did a good job there as well. So James Wan is not only good at directing, horror films, but he's proven himself to be very good at directing an over-the-top and ridiculous action movie, which I think he's actually trying to do more of now because he is doing Aquaman 2. I gotta say this though, Mr. Nobody has some perfect timing when he says that he took the liberty of getting Dom's team ready. Can you imagine Dom walking into the warehouse and they're already there? Hey, what are you guys doing here? But in regards to this military or spy espionage subplot, main plot, it becomes the main plot. It really, like, they don't focus on the revenge part of the story with Shaw and Dom at all. They kind of just forget about it. I mean, that's what this movie set up. That's what the last movie set up. They were leading to this, and then it just kind of gets forgotten about by the end of the movie. I mean, Dom and Shaw do fight, but by the time you get to the third act, I personally just didn't feel as invested in the revenge story as much as I was at the beginning, because we spent so much time on this mission of theirs to try and retrieve this God's Eye device. It doesn't really matter what it is, but I really needed more time to stew on the vengeance that both our hero and villain are, you know, fighting for. Like, I don't know, this movie is weird because I enjoy it. It is entertaining, but it could have been so much more than what it was. And I understand that these Fast and Furious movies are just, that's what they are now. They're spy espionage movies with fast cars. But that doesn't excuse the fact that they just totally ignored a perfectly good plot with Jason Statham's character. Anyway, so I have to talk about Paul Walker's death. Only one other actor who did pass away has affected me like Paul Walker's death. Paul Walker was the first one, you know, the first actor that unfortunately passed away that had an effect on me, because I grew up with him. I grew up watching him in these movies, and watching this when it first came out, I was about 17, I think. It destroyed me. I was in tears. You know, we cry when we see our favorite characters on screen die, like Tony Stark from Endgame, but when the actual actor dies, it's a whole different set of feelings. And you guys probably don't know this, but I used to do vlogs on my channel ages ago. I started back in 2015, and I've now taken them off my channel. But one of these vlogs that I did was in tribute to Paul Walker, because it just, like I said, it just destroyed me. And how they handled his unfortunate passing in this movie, I thought they did a good job at doing it. That last scene was the final, it got me. I don't want to say those words, but it got me. Anyway, that's my review for Furious 7, or Fast and Furious 7, whatever they want to call it. My next review is for The Fate of the Furious, so I will see you in that review. But where it actually became like it doesn't ruin a John Wick film. No. What's it called? That not only is Jason Statham characters, fuck, I can't speak at all. I gotta fucking get this.